the dark empath. Have you heard of this one before?
No.
Yeah, so it's because a lot of people that have experienced narcissistic abuse and been in narcissistic relationships that are very abusive, they're like, I don't know how to set boundaries. I don't know how to deal with emotional manipulation. And then this topic of the dark empath, which has some kind of scientific grounding because it is mentioned in a scientific paper where the term has come from. And they further elaborated on it. But apparently a dark empath is somebody who has strong empathetic abilities. They can feel people. They know how to maneuver the emotional space between another person and themselves. But they can also do that in a manipulative way. So I wanted to provide, first of all, an understanding, but also I wanted to help people to strengthen their ability to reflect. I think because of all these changes and uncertainties in our world, we've become so much more focused on external aspects and less focused on the internal aspects. So reflection is a great way for you to not make too quick of a decision, and that you can also then eventually also reflect on yourself. Because when we see a red flag in somebody, sometimes it means that we are the red flag. So if we could take more action, that's not only for here, that's for all around the world. But I take that specific example. You can talk for 3 hours, but you can also talk for 1 hour and maybe 2 hours, take action about it, do something else about it. So that's where I feel that, that maybe more can be done around that specific thing. Look, generally speaking, I find the Serbs, I find them extremely resilient.
Psihologa Alija Fenika na društvenim mrežama prate milioni. Njegove kratke lekcije i savjeti viralno se dele. Može se reći da je postao svojevrsna TikTok senzacija, a nedavno je bio gost na Beogradskom sajmu knjiga. Tada smo imali prilike da razgovaramo, a u ovoj epizodi čućete kako je nastala njegova knjiga Crvene zastavice, zelene zastavice. Pričali smo i o savremenim odnosima, dark psihologiji, o tome zašto nas privlače pogrešni ljudi, ko su psihopate i manipulatori oko nas i kako prepoznati znakove koji govore više od reči. Rad Alija Fenika povezuje nauku, svakodnevni život, a njegove ideje o modernim odnosima, granicama i emocijama postiču nas da se stvarno zapitamo a gde su naše crvene, a gde zelene zastavice. Dozvoljena vam je i bela zastavica, ne brinite, a ako vam se dopadne naš sadržaj, kliknite na dugme subscribe i zapratite nas na društvenim mrežama, Lagune i Delfija. Dobrodošli u podcast Bukmarker. Ali, thank you for joining us. This isn't your first time in Belgrade, and you had a chance to present your book, Red Flags, Green Flags, at the Belgrade Book Fair. What are your impressions here?
Well, first of all, Mona, thank you for having me in today's discussion on this podcast. I'm very happy to be here. Look, yesterday, I've been to Belgrade a couple of times. I really love Serbia. And it was my first time to go to the book fair. I was really impressed. It was a very big building, I thought, and the hall was really beautiful. Many different stands were there. Laguna stand was, of course, the biggest. It was nice to see. I got to interact yesterday with a lot of the readers, which was fantastic. I mean, one thing that I love about book fairs is that you really get to meet people that love reading, that love books. And that means also people that don't know or don't go on social media. And that was really great because when you speak to people about your book and they read your book and they dive into your book, sometimes they give you a perspective to what you've written, but from a very different angle. You go like, oh, that's an interesting point. I never thought about that before. You looked at it from that way? Do you know what I mean?
Interesting, yeah.
I love that. And the interaction with people is great. And also people that know you from social media, they'll also come and see you as well. And I got to also meet my local publisher and Laguna, and a great team, wonderful people, so well organized. And being here with them, I think one of the things as an author that I like to do is I like to build a strong relationship with my local publishers. And now it's been the opportunity to do that. And it's been really nice.
We're glad to have you here. You're very popular on social media as the modern-day psychologist. What brought you there in the first place? And Sorry.
No,
Of course you can.
No, absolutely. So was that the question, or do you want to ask more?
Yeah, I just want to ask, did you want to make psychology more relatable to the
Accessible.
younger people and younger generations?
Absolutely. I love the question. Look, I never intended to be famous on social media. Was never my intention. I'm a professor. I'm a professor at the university. I teach for many years. I specialize in behavioral science. One day I received the question, is like, Ali, I work mostly with older students, so more executives and managers in company, doing MBA programs, or also a doctorate. And I supervise doctoral candidates in their journey. And so it was like, oh, Ali, we have also younger students here in the university, like in their 20s, the Gen Zs, but we have a hard time reaching them. Their way of consuming content is very different. The topics that they're interested in are very different. Their attention spans are different. Can you go and investigate that as our only behavioral specialist and try and figure that out? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? And I thought, well, what's the first place to start? I thought social media. Because everyone's on social media nowadays, right? So I didn't make content in the beginning. I actually was just investigating, observing the behavior, analyzing, and I came to certain conclusions. And I thought, oh, these are the things that really matter in their lives right now, and these are the challenges they're facing, and this is what kind of consumption and what kind of content they like to consume. And I used all of that also to change up my way of teaching as well, and to maybe support other people well in that process. But then eventually came the question, like, you've got a fun personality, don't you? Maybe you should create your own content.
Dance.
Yeah, no, well, I'll come to the dancing. The dancing is an interesting thing there, because I did that for a reason, strategic reason. And anyway, so I eventually started making content, and the success didn't happen from day one. You have to. That's what social media is: consistency, trying out new things, what doesn't work, what does work. And then, then one day certain videos just really took off. And then from that moment on, I started to realize that I can deliver really good, interesting content about psychology, human behavior, relationships, well-being, etc. But I can do that in a fun and engaging way that fits more with TikTok and fits more with Facebook and Instagram, very differently than what you would do in the classroom. And coming back to the dance, this is really interesting. I did the dance because I got famous on TikTok first, and then Instagram started later. And TikTok in 2021, when I started doing this, was a dance platform. Now it's an SEO platform, but it was a dance platform. So I thought, if I can give good insights and I'll move like I'm dancing, not really dancing, then I can trick the algorithm to believe that I'm dancing. And if everyone likes it, the algorithm thinks they like it because of the dancing, but it's because of the text. And that was one of my gimmicks that actually helped me to go. I still believe today that's what made me go viral.
Okay, that's interesting. And what do you think, what drew them to your content?
Oh, yeah, a great question. It comes back to what you were saying already. Is like one of my talents is I'm able to transform complex matters and theory into easy and digestible content. That's always been my talent. That actually started even in my PhD times, where I remember someone saying to me, look, if you can't explain your PhD to somebody on the back of a beer filter or a glass filter, then you're not doing something right. So you're trained to do very, very scientific work, but you're also trained to be able to explain your work to an everyday person. And I believe I took that to heart. And that's something that I do also in the classroom. But then I thought, and I never realized that I was actually doing that until my publisher of Red Flags, Green Flags in the UK said, Ali, do you know that you have a talent? It's like, what do you mean? It's like, yeah, you're able to transform complex matters into easy and digestible bites of information that people really can understand. And I thought, damn it, that's so true. But it never dawned on me that was a talent. So that was kind of a nice takeaway from my own work on that perspective. And I think that's what I believe really lands with people, I think sometimes psychology content can be very dramatic, or a relationship can be very dramatic. And if you deliver that to people, humor sometimes is a soft landing and makes it more accessible to digest and work with. Yeah.
And on social media, it's easier to share emotions or talk about problems because we are hiding behind the screen. How good or bad is that for us? Have we become too quick to diagnose each other?
Well, first of all, I don't think we should diagnose each other.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's the benefits. There's green flags and red flags of social media usage. The green flags is in this perspective that social media has made us much more informed than we ever were before. So you see a lot of people nowadays saying, hey, you know, I've been in a 20-year marriage or a relationship, and I never knew that those behaviors were toxic behaviors. I never knew that those were unhealthy behaviors. I have always accepted them. And so social media has come in to inform people. Now, of course, there's a lot of very different perspectives on social media, but I think in general, it has really informed the public about knowing more about, you know, all kinds of behaviors in that perspective. It's definitely informed us in that, and I think that's good. The second thing, I think social media is also a great way to, you know, get ideas across to a lot of people. But again, the filtering is really important. How do you filter? I get that question a lot. How do you know what to watch and what not to watch? What is good and what's not good? But again, I think now looking into the red flags of social media usage is the fact that, you know, this therapy talk that they often refer to, like quickly saying to someone, "Oh, you're a narcissist," or "Oh, you're a psychopath," or you know, "Oh, this is trauma." And the problem with this is that social media and our world today in general, we're heralded for coming up with quick answers. Like even at work, "Oh, good job, you're so switched on," they say. But our world is making us much more faster in terms of how we think and react, which is not always a good thing. You know, if we think too fast, we trip up, we fall into biased thinking, heuristics, shortcuts, etc. And so when people quickly evaluate someone and say, "Oh, you're a narcissist," that's a really bad thing to do because, you know, I mean, generally speaking, only 1%, up to 1% of the general population has narcissistic personality disorder. Psychopathy, exactly the same thing. So there's an extremely low probability that someone will have that condition. But nowadays it becomes so easy to say, "Oh, you didn't give me enough attention. You're a narcissist." Oh,
yes, it's easy to say it.
Totally. So I think that's the drawback, and that's where a bit of, you know, accountability comes in. Now, let me be honest. I mean, I consider my content to be infotainment. So I also in the book I talk about this issue as well. But of course, I have a humoristic approach to things, and I also play into that as well. But generally speaking, I try to inform the public also about being more mindful, and that's kind of the key message that I try to bring across. Yeah.
I imagine many people reach out to you with kinds of problems, with dilemmas or something like that. What are the most common ones? And have you noticed any particular issue becoming more permanent lately?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, a lot of people reach out to me via DMs, and I don't respond to them, honestly, because people actually come to you with very serious problems. First of all, you know, I think if you want support, you should reach out to a mental health specialist or a therapist, a licensed therapist, and don't go to people online. Not even when people online are actually psychiatrists or clinicians or medical professionals. Online is an informational space, and I always say that. So even from a professional, just don't engage with those questions with them there. Always go to someone offline and to a specialist. However, the questions that do come up that I see like in patterns of behavior, you know, often relate more to the relationship atmosphere or to oneself. Like, for example, you know, I don't know which direction I want to go to in life, what my purpose is. How do I find my purpose? And, you know, how do I stay committed to my goals? Those are kind of more on the personal development side. But then on the relationship side, it's like, okay, how can I recognize if my partner is truly a narcissist or that he or she is cheating? Why do I keep on attracting the bad people into my life, for example? That's a very common question. Another common question is also like, how does my past inform my current behavior today? I would say mostly those are the themes that come up a lot. But of course, nowadays, narcissism is, again, bringing that term back, is a huge topic, right? And the dark empath. Have you heard of this one before?
No.
Yeah, so it's because a lot of people that have experienced narcissistic abuse and been in narcissistic relationships that are very abusive, they're like, you know, I don't know how to set boundaries. I don't know how to deal with emotional manipulation. And then this topic of the dark empath, which has some kind of scientific grounding because it is mentioned in a scientific paper where the term has come from. And they further elaborated on it. But apparently a dark empath is somebody who has strong empathetic abilities. They can feel people. They know how to maneuver the emotional space between another person and themselves. But they can also do that in a manipulative way. So basically, the dark empath has been positioned, without it being named that way, as the enemy of the narcissist, the only one that can actually identify and prevent the narcissist from hurting them, actually makes them run away. So I think that's kind of a common theme that gets a lot of likes nowadays on social media. Yeah.
And an expert on human behavior and technology, you explore how people act in love at work and with families also in your book. Is there something that connects all those relationships, a common thread in how we behave?
Oh, yeah, completely. I love what you say. Look, when I wrote the book about the different domains of relationships, right? It's a great framework to use because everyone can relate to that. But no one is a specialist in every single domain. I'm not a specialist in every single domain. I'm probably specialist in one domain. I know one or two things about other domains, and other domains I have to dive in myself. But when I wrote the book, I made sure that the book was based on foremost scientific evidence, though I just wanted to make it sure that it was very digestible, but everything was based on science. So I looked up a lot of things. I verified many kind of specific like frameworks and theories, because you can imagine each domain of partnerships and friendships and relationships has their own theories and their own scientific grounding. So when we think about family, we can think about specific theories in childhood development, attachment styles, for example, psychodynamic theory, schema theory perspectives, and adult theory, learning theory. There's all these various perspectives that come into play, and how those different, like for example, interactions with parents impact us. Where we look into the dating field, especially in today's, this is what's really interesting. I talk a lot about modern day phenomena, and many books don't talk about the modern day world. Like, why are people ghosting? Why are people engaging in situationships and not wanting long-term relationships, etc. And I provide a really strong scientific, but also behavioral psychological explanation from the technology all the way to the behavioral phenomena that we see today. And so that's where I try to be very specific to each domain. However, within human behavior, there are very common characteristics across the board. Manipulation across the board is a common theme, right? It happens at work, it happens with friendships. And manipulation basically is a survival strategy. And depending how you learn how to use that subtly or very overtly, then of course that plays out in different ways because of different reasons, etc. So you do find, for example, that's how I like the question, because you do have psychology. I mean, our brains function from, it doesn't matter where you come from China, Serbia, anywhere, our brains function in the same way. We have the same heuristics, we have the same biases in that perspective. So there are commonalities around human behavior. Nice thing to know as well is that we humans are much more similar than we actually are different. Though we want to believe we're very different, we're not actually. So there's a lot of common themes that cross all those different boundaries or domains of relationships. But at the same time, there are very specific ones that go deeper into their own domains. Again, open communication is very important. Empathy is also extremely important. So I would say those core emotions, but they play out a bit differently depending on the situation, right? So also our environment has a huge influence on our behavior. So taking that environmental perspective also into consideration, because a work environment is different than a family environment. And a family environment is maybe different than friendships, for example. Yeah? So those nuances, we get to go a little bit more deeper on.
These days, everyone is doing psychology on internet or something like that. How to find something that it's important and
relevant.
It's relevant, yes.
Well, I think this comes back to, because there's a lot of people out there, right? I mean, I guess, how do you first of all find out the source of information that's given to you? Is a relevant source. I think that's very, is it credible, first of all? Is it relevant? So if you are seeing, like, for example, professionals online talking about either mental health or behavioral psychology, then look at their credentials. I think that's a first important step, or their experience in the field, to evaluate if what they provide is of good quality in that perspective. Number two, look at the type of content that they're providing. Is it informational? Is it medically informational? Is it educational? Is it infotainment? Like mine, I define mine as infotainment. Why do I do that? Because it's one way it's informational, but the other way it's also humoristic and entertaining. So I find a fine balance between, and that's what also a lot of people like to have. But also, I think also what's really interesting is like there are a lot of content creators out there that talk about psychology. And again, I mean, you don't have to take every single word that people says to you, but I always say find one or two sources that you find very interesting to engage with, and focus on those, because for everyone, someone has a different interest in a topic, for example, or in a specific domain and field. So that's the first one. When it comes to, so that's on the evaluation side of things. Then when you talk about, the what's relevant to you, again, I think, you should consider for yourself what do you want to take away from psychology. Often when we think about psychology, people think, it's clinical psychology, it's the medical model. But psychology is so much more broader. I've never personally specialized in my initial phases in the medical model. I've focused on behavioral psychology, the application of psychology in the wider domain of sense, into business, into society, also people, but never from a clinical or a medical perspective. It's only later in life that I got my degree in clinical psychology to have a better understanding of mental health issues, because that's becoming, of course, much more of a bigger topic. And I'm currently also finalizing my master's in psychotherapy as well. And I'm having clinical training right now because I see that mental health issues are growing and there's a lot of demand for that. So to be able to speak with that with more authority, I feel that that's also really important to be able to work in that field. But psychology is an extremely broad domain, and you need to figure out what is interesting to you. Yeah.
And if someone wanted to apply your ideas to their own life, where should they start? With book, of course, but where they...
Well, I mean, the fundamental thinking behind the book is, maybe I should give kind of what are the main themes of the book. One of the main themes of the book is, because we live in a rapidly changing world, things have become confusing. People really don't understand anymore what's really happening. Why people don't want to be in long-term relationships. Why are people ghosting their employers nowadays. So I wanted to provide, first of all, an understanding, but also I wanted to help people to strengthen their ability to reflect. I think because of all these changes and uncertainties in our world, we've become so much more focused on external aspects and less focused on the internal aspects. So reflection is a great way for you to not make too quick of a decision. And that you can also then eventually also reflect on yourself. Because when we see a red flag in somebody, sometimes it means that we are the red flag.
Yes.
Right? And if we don't take responsibility to look inwards, then we're always blaming other people for stuff that might be happening with us. And that prevents you from becoming a better person. That prevents you from fostering much more stronger relationships. And it also prevents you from strengthening your mental muscle or your social muscle in that perspective. So I think the key message there is become more reflective. And the second thing that I'd like to emphasize, I think we've never lived in a world that is as connected as we are today. But at the same time, we've never seen so much more loneliness in today's world. That's kind of a complete paradox. And the pandemic has a role to play in that, of course, but also our media consumption, mobile gaming. Younger people nowadays call their online friends that they've never met before friends. So we are becoming so much more focused on ourselves. And I'm a bit fearful that if this technology advances in this way, that we will lose more that face-to-face connection. And we need social connections because it helps us to survive. It helps us to build a stronger immune system. It helps us to think more critically. It helps us to, it improves, it has so many benefits. It even actually, it's a Harvard study that was done for 85 years. They've been following people, I don't know if you know the study, to see how they've evolved and social interactions, to find interesting correlations between their life, health, etc. And the number one factor that they found had the strongest impact on your longevity was meaningful social connections. Isn't that fascinating?
Yes.
So I think the second takeaway from the book is I want people to build stronger social connections in a digital world, and not to lose that, but also not to lose their mental strength and capacity to be able to deal with challenging situations. Because, hey, every long-term relationship has a challenge, right? Or it has conflict to some degree.
Yes, and I think that the phrase "red flags" is everywhere today, and TikTok and conversation, even in headlines. What's the biggest misconception people have about that term?
About red flags and green
Yes.
flags? Yeah. Well, it's funny that you say that. Something I've noticed recently with a lot of the interviews that I've had, I think the misconception that people have about red flags is that when there's a red flag, you have to run away. It's like, next,
Yes. Yes.
That's
yes.
not the
That's
case. Again, I think what's really important to mention here is that our brains were made for survival. Our brains were not made for success or happiness. That means we're more in tune to the negative, because, fearful, run away. We're less risk-taking, more risk-averse. And if we look at a lot of the physiological responses when we're under stress, shutting down, disillusionment, a lot of overthinking are reflections of how our body and our mind is kind of trying to keep you safe by doing something, sometimes consciously and unconsciously. And so that first negative reaction is like, oh, red flag. It's an emotional reaction. It's not a response. It's a reaction. And so when I say red, so in the book I call red as an acronym. So besides the labels, besides the insights, I also want to give people a mental process to slow down their thinking. So red stands for reflect, engage, and decide. So reflect, wait a minute, why is that a red flag? Should I be investigating more patterns of behavior? Let me spend some more time evaluating, or maybe I'm the red flag. Maybe I need to look at myself before I make a decision. So building in that reflective capacity helps people then to take a step back and not to be too judgmental, especially in today's world where we're so quick to judge. And I think that's what I want to try to prevent. And I think that's often a misconception about what a red flag is.
Yeah, and I think that we perhaps become too obsessed with red flags, then so much that we forgot that there are also green flags, and I think that's the main problem, because we have just red flags.
Beautiful, and I'm happy you addressed that. That's why that's why I wanted to focus and emphasize in the book about green flags, because remember, if our brain was made for survival, if something is safe, I don't need to look at it. You kind of just bypass it. But that's the problem. It's like having a plant. You need to nurture it. You need to give it food, light, nutrition, nutrients. And so that's what I say in the book. Like when someone shows you a green flag, open communication, shows you empathy, respect, elevating behaviors, you name it, honor that, acknowledge it. Let people know that you really, really care about that behavior. Because the more we nurture it, the more we can nurture that behavior and sustain positive behaviors over time. The moment we don't give it any attention, maybe that green behavior can disappear over time.
And how hard is to recognize a red flag in us?
Very difficult. Yes. No. Let's be honest. It's extremely difficult, and it's first of all, more than 85% of our decision making is influenced by things that we are not aware of. So our conditioning from the past, the lighting, the environment, social factors, emotional factors, environmental factors, as I mentioned, and so we're not always conscious of everything that we do. If we were, I think our brains would explode. There's too much information to compute. So the brain has evolved in a very, very amazing way over the thousands of years to allow us to all the things that we need to do quickly, like talk and speak and move at the same time, so that we have that automatic part of the brain that's continuously buzzing. But then we have the more conscious part of the brain that is evaluating what I need to do, what I need to say. We're more habitual. We have a lot of habits in our behaviors. And the moment that the brain says, hey, let me create a habit, let's just kind of hardwire this. So it allows you to use cognitive resources later for more important tasks in that perspective. What was the question, I guess, sir?
Red flags in ourselves.
Oh, in ourselves, yeah. Okay, so, so red flags in ourselves. So when we behave to survive in this world, we don't always know what we're doing. We're just working on automatic pilot. So we need the feedback from other people to tell us what we're not doing right. First of all, I think that's very important. And that's why I want to encourage a lot of people, give constructive feedback to people. I always say it's like having bad breath. You don't know it, but the people around you do know it. Hopefully someone will tell you. That's one. That's one thing. But that's good to get that feedback, right? And then what do we do with that feedback once we receive it? Well, it depends on ourselves. If our ego is very fragile and we don't want to do anything with that feedback, we push it away. And, I call it the ostrich effect. We stick our head in the sand and pretend that nothing's happening. It just makes the behavior worse. But sometimes, people do want to work with that, and they they realize that and they think, oh, wait a minute, maybe I'm doing this wrong. Maybe I'm responding in this way because of something that happened to me in the past, and I really want to do something about it. And that's an amazing realization. But I think we also need to realize that everyone is on their own healing path. Everyone is in their own growth journey. And you can't change people until people will want to change themselves. And that's something that I think not only in life, but you see in therapy as well, that when people are not ready to change, it becomes very difficult to have them to change. So I think it's very difficult. But the more that we can be open and vulnerable with ourselves, and open to kind of consider to change and be a better person, I think that by itself is a great starting point.
And in your book, you mentioned manipulation, and you earlier mentioned that problem. If we wanted to spot a manipulator, what's the first sign people usually overlook?
Well, this is an interesting question because manipulation can happen in various different types and forms, right? So influencing people, I think we all influence. Let's distinguish the difference between influence and manipulation. So influence, even with the moment we're born, we start influencing our parents to feed us and take care of us and hold us, right? By crying. And I think over our many years of growth and how we evolve in the environment, we learn specific tactics that we know eventually can influence the other person. I mean, you're influencing a partner every single day, or a friend or a colleague to do something, right? And there's different ways that we can do that. When it comes to manipulation, then manipulation really goes into kind of controlling somebody, changing someone's perception of reality, really where it has a negative effect on the other person, or where you're trying to gain something, but in a malicious kind of way. That's where I would draw the line between influence, and because influence can also influence people to do something for you, but manipulation is really playing people against other people, or again, gaslighting other people in that perspective, or even love bombing it. It's a source of control. That's also a form of manipulation. Now, manipulation doesn't always have to be very obvious. Manipulation often is very subtle, because let's say master manipulators are really, really good at slowly, and not always consciously, mostly consciously, but sometimes very unconsciously, that slowly but surely they start to kind of step in with small little baby steps. I call it the slippery slope. Behavioral science is a common theme, because you start with one, go to another, and then it becomes worse and worse and worse over time. But because it happens so gradually, you don't notice it, you accept the behavior, you pass it away, you justify the behavior. And that's one of the key things that I always say about manipulation that often people don't look at because the behaviors are so subtle. But if you're able to address the subtle behaviors early on, you can prevent a lot of drama from happening down the road. So again, we can talk about different examples of that, but I think that's a general thing that often gets not looked at. And I think we should focus much more on that. But of course, again, there's different forms of manipulation, but that's a key thing that I often feel that people tend to forget, but we should pay much more attention to the small details.
And the important part of your book is dating. Despite all the platforms and that we have now, has it actually become harder to find the right person? And what are the most common red flags there?
Okay. So has dating become much more difficult compared to, let's say, 20 years ago? Yes, for many reasons. I believe so. First of all, the changing social dynamics. Not everyone wants to be, feels the need to be in a long-term relationship or get married. I think that's a very critical point. Second of all, the world has also become a little bit more uncertain. So, people also want to develop their careers. Women are having children much more later in life, for example. So I think, that in that perspective, it has become a little bit more challenging. People, like I said, are focusing more on themselves nowadays. And so therefore dating is like, you need to meet so many criteria sometimes to find someone who's more into a long-term relationship. But also then the dating apps also play a huge role in how they've influenced online and offline behavior. dating apps are really interesting because, first of all, they create this illusion that there's like a limitless option of people. Oh, look how many people there. I can always find somebody. So that has led to ghosting behaviors, or, because we're online, we can easily swipe left, swipe right. 20 years ago, we had to get dressed. We had to look nice. We had to brush our teeth. We had to, I keep on talking about teeth. We had to really be on our best behavior. And we also needed to be rejected. And like, damn it, I got rejected. How can I do it better next time? So that's a social muscle, or what I call putting in the effort. And I think the digital technologies today have killed the effort process. Which and again, the brain is very lazy. So if you allow the brain to be lazy, it will be lazy. And so I think that kind of quick and easy way about, and if I don't like you, maybe I should say that to you. But now, no, I don't like you. Let me ghost you.
I like you call the IKEA effect.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you explain
it a little
bit?
Totally.
It's really interesting.
Absolutely.
Because it's really
I talk about
name.
that in the book. That's kind of where I try to use behavioral psychology, explain some of the modern day phenomena. So one of the key conclusions that I made about why dating is not really working out as it should be doing in today's world, and the complexities around that, I think technology, I'm not saying unconsciously, but has killed that effort process, to which everything needs to be quick and fast. And when I compare the dating to where 20 years ago, again, people put more effort into things. And the IKEA effect is a very interesting psychological phenomenon. And basically it shows that when I hate IKEA, I don't like IKEA. I have two left hands. I remember still having a cupboard at home, and the back of the cupboard is still broken after so many years. It's like, I had to put that together. But I'm not everybody. And there are a lot of people out there that love that DIY, do it yourself, That's the huge the success behind these big companies like IKEA. And people love it. They love to put their hands into it, their sweat equity and their effort. And then it's interesting. There's been a lot of behavioral experiments where they actually, have people come in and evaluate this cup. Let's say it's an IKEA cup, and you put it together. And this is, and then you come in, you put it together, and you ask, how much what would you charge for this? I think 50 cents. And then you have someone who comes in, who's objective, who hasn't seen that cup before, and they'll only pay 5 or 10 cents. So there's a discrepancy between perceived value, between what the person has put the effort into versus the person that's just looking at it. Isn't that fascinating? So I use that analogy, or I use the theory to explain why we don't value, or why we don't sustain relationships, because we don't value people. We see people as options because of all the options we have online. And the moment we take out the effort process, we therefore perceive people as less. Isn't that crazy? Maybe we should bring back the effort process to value each other a little bit more.
I agree. Lately, you have been talking about dark psychology. It's really interesting for me. And is it that darker side of human behavior? And do you think we all have that dark corner in ourselves?
Yeah.
And could you explain that term, dark psychology?
Yeah, I use dark psychology in one specific way, but I think coming back to the question, like, do we all have a dark side? Let's go back to Carl Jung's work, right? Psychoanalyst, and it's kind of the protege of Freud, but he had a different perspective about, where the unconscious comes from. And his work specifically focused on the shadow self. We all have a shadow self. We all have a part of ourselves that we feel shameful of, or that we dislike. And his theory is that we don't have to accept all of it, but we have to acknowledge it and start to find ways to integrate both how we are and how our shadow self is. And the idea behind it is that the more that we're integrated, the better we are as a person over time, the better we can manage ourselves. And because the moment that you don't address your shadow side, it can lead to all kinds of, maladaptive coping strategies, or projection onto other people. And, I don't like this because they don't like that about themselves. And so that's where I kind of feel that reflective part is really, really important. Get to know your shadow side. Get to know the things that are not as effective in today's world for you, or that the behaviors or the attitudes or the personalities that you might not like about yourself, because we all wear a mask of shame. Let's be honest. We're all brought up in society to be shameful of something. And so when we go to work, we show one face. When we're with our family, we show another face. And so but those parts inside of us are darker parts. I think we need to look at them, not ignore them, and acknowledge them and see how we can integrate them. Now, when I talk about dark psychology in the specific kind of term, I talk often about it when I talk about organizational politics. And I specifically focused on narcissistic personality disorder. It's a dark triad, Machiavellianism, and of course, psychopathy. And now sadism has been added to the quadrant, right? They've created a quadrant out of that. And look, we all have, to some degree, we all have traits of Machiavellism, because strategic thinking, or psychopathy, which is more kind of making decisions without having too much feelings or emotions around it, or traits of narcissism, which more about feeling good about yourself, ego strength, etc. Now, why is it a disorder? Because with people that have a very high level of one of those conditions, then it turns into a disorder, of course, right? So I talk about that to make people more aware, because again, we're so quick to mention someone that might be a narcissist, but we all have these traits inside of us. And again, it's not a bad thing. But when we talk about, for example, it happening in the workplace, workplace settings, sometimes, especially with leadership roles, you can see that psychopathy and narcissistic personality disorder is above the global average, like sometimes up to 5%.
Yes, and that's my second question. It's really interesting, and the 5% of corporate executives are psychopaths.
Sociopaths, yeah.
Sociopaths, yes.
Yeah, both. It could be either. Yeah.
Is that corporation and capitalism good ground for that?
Well, look, capitalism, in itself is not only a reason for it, but if you do focus on profit orientation only and cutthroat behaviors and dirty competition and politics as a way to achieve your goals, and you allow such a culture to thrive, because every organization is different, right? But what makes, for example, like people with the dark, like have strong dark triad traits or disorders, personality disorders, is when the culture allows it to happen, allows that kind of behavior to flourish. Because again, if you're getting the results, hey, why not? And we're not going to look at you, unless you really have a really negative effect to the organization. Or there's no clear checks and balances in place, or charisma is evaluated over team performance. And so there's specific environmental cues and cultural aspects and processes in the organization that allow certain people to flourish where they should not be flourishing. And of course, capitalism in itself, I guess, is not just the only driver, but of course that money orientation, power orientation, is definitely plays a role in that. It fuels it in that perspective. But nevertheless, even though there's no capitalism, psychopathy and narcissistic personality disorder will always exist. And so how do you deal with that? So you want to try, as an organization, try to prevent that from affecting the wider organization. I think that's a key strategy that I think needs to be taken into consideration. Yeah.
And can you give us, the main characters of how do we see and find psychopaths in our environment?
Yeah, no, there are specific traits. I think complete lack of empathy. Very deterministic about their, what they want to achieve. Easy to use other people. Very manipulative to achieve their goals. Destructive in that perspective as well. And there's various characteristics. If you look at narcissistic personality disorder, extreme high sense of ego, or inflatedness. Also, not all people that have narcissistic personality disorder have a complete lack of empathy. That's not always the case, because you have narcissists that also actually have empathetic abilities as well. Many other characteristics that come up and that you can evaluate them. But it's hard because remember, we all have traits, right? So if you look at traits, even in board levels, 25% of board members, I'm quoting some studies that I was quoting in the book, have traits, but it doesn't mean that they have narcissistic personality disorder or are psychopathic. That should always be left to a mental health professional to evaluate. But unfortunately, those people, I always say that those people never go to the therapist. It's always the victims that end up going to the therapist, unfortunately, you know. But the key, I think the key thing that I would like to say, the moment that you do notice people that really are very manipulative, very cutthroat, non-emotional, you know, and also you should stay away from them. They're very dangerous people. They will make it sometimes their lives to destroy you. And so, you know, I've seen that also in the workplace. And it's a very scary observation to see, right? Of course, you can have people that engage in politics, but when you actually find a psychopath at work, stay away from them. Don't engage with them. That's the key message that I try to bring across. Yeah.
And I found your Did You Know chapters really interesting. You said that you write about that campaigns and terrorist groups having a common. What
yes, cults, terrorist groups, and organizations.
Yes,
what they have in common.
Yes.
Yeah,
what do they have in common?
It's very interesting because what these all three have, cults and terrorist groups and organizations, what they have in common is something in psychology called social identity. And social identity helps us to understand where we belong. Our brains work in terms of self-categorization. So as we grow up and we develop our identity, what a lot of people don't realize is that we develop our own identity on the basis of the most strongest interest groups that we find interesting. Could be sports groups, could be religious groups, could be hobby groups, whatever. Being an environmentalist is also an identity. So the more we start to associate with specific groups of people, the more we take on the prototypical characteristics of those groups into our own behavior or our own identity. Because our identity is fluid, it's dynamic, it always changes. And so, so how does social identity play into organizations? Well, social identity plays into organizations because identity can be strategically used to influence people's behaviors, perceptions. So I always say that it can be used very positively, right? So a positive way is ensuring that you have strong core values and purpose. I identify with the core values of the organization. That's really good because when you're strongly aligned with the purpose and the mission of the organization, you don't need to always be told what to do. You kind of like, even in challenging times, you can still remain resilient. And I want to fight for this mission, or I care for the fact that my company works for, does something on sustainability or social entrepreneurship. And no matter what happens to me, I'm going to stay focused to that. And that's how identification can really play a strong role. But think about the job titles that you have in the organization. In Dubai, they have really cool titles like Chief Happiness Officer, you know, or and it's fantastic. So you can use those titles as a way of also identification. And sometimes people will just go for rather go for the promotion for the title than getting paid extra money. So there's different ways of how you can use identity in the workplace as a way to create a stronger connection, a sense of belonging between people. Now, people who are highly coming to your question, people who are highly identified to their organization. For example, I love to, lawyers, for example, or architects. Oh my God, architects. They're like, they always say, we architects.
Yes.
We architects do this. It's almost like an artist kind of thing. But when they say we, that means that their own identity is heavily connected to their industry or their profession. So that means that most likely they will have typical behaviors that represent that of their group. Yeah. Also, that means that they will take on, they'll be also more willing to protect. If anyone attacks their industry or profession, they will attack because it feels now like a personal attack. So basically, you're getting like an overlap between the identity of the organization and the identity of the individual. And the more those two are aligned, the more that you can predict and influence the behavior of that individual, because they actually de-individualize themselves, because being part of a bigger group helps them to feel safe, gives them purpose, makes them resilient. Now, how does this relate to cult groups and to terrorist groups? Well, exactly the same way, because often what happens with these specific two groups is they often find people that don't have very strong identities. Right? Or very weak identity. So they're probably much more easier to influence over time. So they de-individualize themselves and they conform to the bigger group. So whatever the bigger group wants from them, they're more likely to say yes to. And it's kind of like a type of loyalty too much. Like almost like the group goals and objectives mean more than my goals. So I'll be willing to pass my individual needs, I'll be able to put them aside. And that's why we see with those type of groups that when they ask you to do something, you're more likely to do so out of fear or not wanting to be pushed out of the group because you've become so attached to that group. So social identity is a very fascinating psychological construct because it can be used for good, but it can also be used for bad.
Really bad, yes.
Yeah. Love that question. Yeah.
Thank you. I like your quote. You quote the line in your book, we are all products of our past, but we don't have to be prisoners of it.
Yeah.
Why is this such important for you and for us, of course?
100%. Look, I love that you mentioned that. And this just kind of reflects that we don't have a life sentence. Whatever happens to us, but we always have a choice to be better. And that really depends on the individual, their belief systems, and knowing that you have a choice empowers you to make things and do things differently tomorrow. Often when you look at psychotherapy and, specifically psychodynamic and schema therapy, we can see how much of our childhood experiences has such a huge impact and can actually predict how we feel, think, and behave today. It's very scary, but it doesn't have to be that deterministic. Right. Once we become very conscious and aware of our behaviors, I always say that we have a choice to do things differently tomorrow. And that choice needs to come from the individual. So I love to give people that perspective because it empowers people. And I don't think that everyone always realizes that. So once they do start to realize, hey, I have an option, I have a choice, I can be different. That generational trauma that's been in my family for three generations, I can be the one to stop it and not pass it on to my offspring. So, or I have had that experience, for example, and I don't want to pass on that experience to the next generation. So I think we have a choice, and not everyone always realizes that. And I think that's why I love to use that analogy, because it really empowers people.
I agree. And could you tell us more about the concept of the emotional bank account?
Yes.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. So I talk about that, I think, in chapter 6, where I talk about friendships. And again, this is the opposite of social identity theory. It's called social exchange theory. A lot of, and this you were asking before, what's a commonality amongst these different domains, right?
Yes.
Social exchange theory is actually one of those commonalities where human relationships and bonding in a relationship between people happens also through exchanges. So, for example, Mona, I invite you to a party at my house, and we have a great time. And then 2 weeks later, you say, hey, why don't you come over for dinner at our house, for example? And then I come over and we exchange. And that happens in the workplace as well. You exchange with each other. Like they give you training when you come to work, and then you give your effort, and then they give you support. And eventually, and once that exchange relationship, either between friends, partners, or workplace, happens in a balanced way, you know what to expect from the other person. You don't have to think too rationally about it. You start to allow yourself to be more emotionally connected. Oh, I trust you. I like you. I want to work for you. I want to work for you. The words already say it already in itself. So that you build up like an emotional bank account with somebody. So after you know that someone's going to do something good for you, then maybe, but our lives are not always very stable. So sometimes what happens is that, someone gets sick or can't work anymore, is not happy anymore, or whatever, and you're like, no, I'll take care of it, or I'll pay, or don't worry, let me just do what you want. I'll be there to support you. And because you've already built up a strong emotional bank account with someone, it's okay to kind of take some costs on that relationship. You're not going to evaluate it too much on exchanges back to back. So you allow the emotional bank account to get smaller and smaller and smaller, anticipating that it will be reciprocated, because reciprocation is foundational to social interaction. If I scratch your back, you scratch mine. That's a very strong factor of persuasion and influence. We're so used to giving each other, and always keeping to mind that, you've done something for me, I need to do something for you. So, but what happens over time sometimes, and unfortunate situations, is that people get so used to receiving and taking that your emotional bank account kind of is done, it's empty, but people just keep on taking because they've gotten so used to be getting more or giving more, whatever, and then that can unbalance the relationship. So I'm not saying that every relationship should only be be based on exchanges, but it's good to take into consideration that, you know, when people need that support, we can go out and help them. But it's always really good to be mindful of that and always try, in one way or another, give that back and you know, feed that back to the other person so that you maintain yourself in a more balanced way.
And from your experience, how important are psychological books in helping people, inform them, or to encourage them to go to therapy or something like that?
Well, again, so I think self-help books, they play a major role in informing people about behavior, about psychology, about social interactions, relationships, etc. And there are many books out there, right? So I think helping yourself and reading books or doing courses is a great way to develop yourself. I mean, by far, it's just a great way to work on yourself, and you can do that in different ways. And self-help books are there, and you need to find out what works with you. I always believe that we should continue to write self-help books and psychology books because there's always going to be something that resonates with somebody, right? I mean, you can find a book from one author to another author, and even though it's based on really good science and really good insights, you might resonate a little bit more with another author because of their personality, their approach, their way of thinking. Maybe they're a little bit more spiritual, because I don't know if you know this, but more than two-thirds of psychologists are atheists. Did you know
really?
this?
No,
Yes,
no.
yeah. It was a survey done in the U.S., and they found more than 70% of psychologists are atheists. So it seems to be something of a tradition to, but that's more the clinical psychology side. But yeah, they seem not to be religious, and so therefore that's why you also don't see a lot of spirituality being brought into the field of therapy. Or into clinical psychology. It's very fascinating.
Yes, it's really, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So maybe you have a self-help book by a psychologist or a therapist that actually talks a little bit more about the spiritual side of things. And like I said, I'm in my clinical training right now for psychotherapy, and different modalities that have come up that I find very interesting are Christian CBT. So Christian cognitive behavioral therapy based approaches, because again, you know, people can heal themselves and become better because of taking in that religious, spiritual component into the therapeutic discussion and work. And so it's very interesting. So again, I think there are variations, personalities, styles, approaches, and belief systems, and then you find that what fits with you. And that's what I do always love about self-help books and psychology books. Yeah.
And how does the perception of flags or therapy change across the cultures? And what is the red and green flags you have noticed here in Serbia or in the Balkans in general? Do we have some the same
to watch out what I say. This will air when I leave, right? No, I'm just joking. So the commonality, look, the reason why I wrote red flags, green flags, right? I love it because red and green is so universal. It's super universal. Like the book has been translated in 23 languages, in Korean and Chinese. I mean, there's so many, but why is there so much interest in it? Because it's a framework that's universal across the board. Bringing back to the kind of like danger, warnings, and safe kind of perspective. And everyone understands that red is maybe danger and green is more safer. So it provides a framework for mutual understanding. And again, on social media, you see it's so popular. Everyone understands it. It's quick and easy, and it allows for communication. But also, if you provide more depth, you can really go deeper into the topic. So I kind of also, in a sense, you know, like they say nowadays that you only have 3 seconds to capture someone's attention with a video, otherwise they scroll to the next video. It's kind of that sense as well. This is the quick and easy, catch your attention. But when you open up the book, you actually go deeper. And that's kind of what I also played into in that perspective. So in that sense, it's very universal. And the follow-up question was on...
About us, Serbian
and
Serbians,
Balkan. Yes. I thought I could deviate from the question. No.
No.
I'm just joking. Okay. So one thing I really love about Balkan, Serbian culture, but I also see it in Croatia and other countries as well around the region, is you guys love to have a coffee together and spend 3 hours sitting there and gossiping and sharing drama with each other, and that kind of like sit together and have a coffee and talk. It's almost like free therapy, right? It's almost like you're giving each other therapy. You say, oh, you should be paying me for this, for sitting here for 3 hours. But in that sense, I think it's good because, I think one of the big problems we're seeing nowadays, a lot of people are very lonely. They're not going out. They're spending more time behind their computers, on their phones, and they're not socializing. So by default, sitting out 3 hours with someone, fantastic. Do it more. I wish more of us in other countries did that as well. Now, the red flag around this, so the green flag I explained, the red flag around this, I would say, too much talk and no action doesn't lead to any behavioral change. So sometimes we can fall trapped into sitting together, complaining, gossiping, talking about, what's not happening in the world. And I think sometimes we need to be that change that we want to see in the world. And that requires action. So if we could take more action, that's not only for here, that's for all around the world. But I take that specific example. You can talk for 3 hours, but you can also talk for 1 hour and maybe 2 hours, take action about it, do something else about it. So that's where I feel that, that maybe more can be done around that specific thing. Look, generally speaking, I find the Serbs, I find them extremely resilient in comparison to other nations. Very, very resilient. So I think that's a huge green flag. I actually made a video a couple of years ago where I talked about red flags and green flags in the Balkans, and people loved it. People from the Balkans, they literally loved it. And I was like, I said, do you go to therapy or do you do it the Balkan way? And I showed the Balkan way. So you have problems, Šljivović or Rakija. I should be saying that. And then I said, oh, you have anxiety? Go clean the house. But people can relate to that, and that's where I call that resilience, right? I think the Balkans and the Serbs are very resilient in that perspective, and that should be acknowledged. And I want to acknowledge that when I compare the Serbs versus other people from other countries around the world. Yeah.
And
does that resonate, by the way? Yeah. Does that resonate? Yeah.
And finally, what about you?
Yes.
Can you tell us about your green or red flag?
Absolutely. I think my number one red flag is, okay, I'm going to justify this first. I feel very connected. I feel very connected to my higher purpose. I know what I need to do in life. I know what I want to do in life. And I don't need to think twice about it. I wake up and I know every day what I need to do, and I do things, and that's a beautiful thing. But sometimes I can get very hyper focused. I can really dial into my job and be a workaholic. I love what I do, but that if you spend too much time, anything where you put too in front of is never good. Too good is also not good. So where I put myself too much into my job, and therefore you lose track of your relationships, your friendships, etc., and to the detriment of that. And so finding a balance in that, I think, is very, very important. And maybe I didn't do that so well in the past, but I do that. I'm trying to do that much more better today. And it's interesting, like, for example, you'll be sitting down, you're working, you're writing proposals, you're doing this, spending the whole day doing that. And then eventually it's like, I was like, oh yeah, why am I not sleeping so well today? And it's like, maybe you're working too hard. And I'm like, no, I know myself so well. And then 2 or 3 days later, I kind of wake up. I wake up in the morning and I think, maybe that's true. So it's not easy. First of all, it really is important to address your red flag and to acknowledge it, but it's not easy to deal with it. And I think I have to walk the talk, and I'm trying to do that. And I try to find a balance with that. So completely eradicating a red flag is not always possible, but it comes back to working with your shadow self. It's about integrating, finding a balance between you and that redness inside of you. That I think is extremely important. Also to, again, for yourself, but also to improve your relationships. And in terms of my green flag, I'm very in tuned into people. So I'm very observable, and I observe the very detailed micro expressions of people. And so when I can tell when someone talks to me or says something to me, when it could be off, or something's not right there, or something isn't in sync with what's being said, or when nothing is being said. And what people don't realize is 93% of our communication is nonverbal. I used to live in Japan. one of my first degrees was actually in Japanese linguistics.
Really?
Yeah, before I got into psychology. I got fascinated into psychology because of living in Japan and working with the Japanese, because their way of thinking is so different and the language is so different. But in Japanese culture and language, it's a high context environment. So you really need to observe, because a lot's being said without being said. Like the expression, like all of that.
Okay, now I'm absolutely nervous.
No, don't be. And so I've become so, and I think I've also had that natural ability as well, besides being the nurture as well. So I pick up on the vibe, on the feeling, the intuition and people. And when I see that, I will ask, I said, is there anything wrong? Is there anything you want to talk about? Or I can see you've been a bit distant lately, or, oh, I see that you like that. So I've always found in my relationships that has played, that's always played a very strong role, and that's always been a great way to strengthen my bond with people. And I could think of another red flag. I'm a very touchy person, so my love language is physical touch, and I believe that is, I don't know if that's a red flag or a green flag, but it's a green flag, because I also found that is also something that has strengthened my relationships with people. Physical touch. Yeah.
Thank you for your honesty.
You're more than welcome.
I think that readers can find it in your book also.
Absolutely.
And thank you for this conversation.
Yeah,
I
thank
really
you for
enjoyed.
Yeah.
I just, in the end, ask you for autograph.
Of course, yes.
And it's a tradition, because we will put it on our shelves.
Oh wow! So I get to be on the shelf here. That's fantastic. Okay, let me. Amazing.